So the last week of lockdown, we hope, and I think this will be the 14th of these little dance around a few plants. And after all the wonderful rain we've had, I thought we'd look at a few hydrangeas today, which are flowering a lot earlier than usual. And behind me we've got Hydrangea Lanarth white, or Lanarth as it's probably more commonly known. All white lace cap hydrangeas, in fact all white hydrangeas full stop, whether they be lace cap or mop head, are best grown in the shade. They keep their colour better, the flowers last longer, and there's more beauty to them, I think. And here, this clump of Lanarth white, which was planted about 20 years ago, is in full shade, and it's also full out. And if we look closely, you know, we see a ring of white florets and blue flowers in the centre. Sometimes those may appear pink if your soil is less acidic than it is here, but the white florets will stay white throughout. When you look closely, some of the florets have got just a little hint of blue in them, but that'll fade as the flowers come out. It's not a tall growing hydrangea. It's probably only about, in maturity, probably about half the size of other white lace caps, and the commonest one which Berncouz sells is Hydrangea libelle, which should probably grow twice the size of this Lanarth here. And when we look, we started with about a dozen plants. One has not made it, but they're now growing underneath an aesculus and underneath a rather nice Prunus serrata, and that's a lovely bit of colour in a shady area. Absolutely wonderful show today. So this is a totally different sort of hydrangea, and it's been here 20 years, but as you can see it's very dwarf growing. And this is a form of Hydrangea serrata called Hydrangea, which is a Japanese name. Don't ask me what it stands for, but Hydrangea serrata have very much smaller flowers and a smaller growth habit than most of the hortensis hydrangeas, which we're more commonly used to looking at. And this little flower starts out pink, in little pink florets, and as the flowers come out they turn blue and purplish blue as they start to fade away. And you can see perhaps quite more clearly down here where we've actually got sort of newly emerged pink flowers, and then they've quickly turned blue. And the other thing you notice about these little ray florets around the flower is that they're actually double ray florets, and that in itself is unusual. And when you look closely, you'll also see that some flowers are actually fertile. They've got actual anthers and stamens in the centre of the flower head, or the twirl of flowers, if you like. But many of these flower heads are actually completely sterile. There is no anther or stamen in the centre of the flower twirl. Although that one there, you can clearly see that has got fertile flowering parts which is the actual flower rather than the floret. But a lot of these flowers are completely sterile, and that is a common feature of Hydrangea serrata varieties. You may think that looks a bit odd in a woodland garden. It's not very big, but actually in a small shrub border, or even at the back of a rockery, it's a wonderful little plant and a very different sort of hydrangea for everyone to enjoy. So pausing for a moment from hydrangeas, let's just have a look at what I think today is possibly the best thing in the garden, and it's really quite an unusual plant. which comes from Chile and Argentina, and it's called Lomatia ferruginea. And it was introduced into the UK in 1846 by the Lobb brothers from Falmouth, who brought back so many Chilean plants, which are now growing well in our gardens. Here it's formed a remarkable small tree of about 25 feet in height, and every single branch is laden down with these extraordinary flowers, which are, I suppose they're a bit reminiscent of a cleanthus or a lobster claw flower, and certainly that's how they look when they're in bud. But I don't think lobster claw really does some, it is quite accurate when you look in detail at the flowers. Normally this plant is full out for the Hampton Court show, where we'd be going in a couple of days' time. And we normally have this cut on the Bernkoos stand there, and we sell really quite a lot of small plants of Lomatia. As a small plant, it doesn't flower terribly well in a pot, and it's got to be up 4 or 5 feet before it starts to flower away like this. Flowering is best after a hot summer, and this is frankly as good a show as I think I've ever seen on this particular tree. The wasps and bees are enjoying the nectar here, and we must be pretty close to a wasp's nest because I can see more wasps than bees. But what an exotic plant. It looks as though it comes from the tropics, but it doesn't. The RHS gave this a first-class certificate in 2001 as an outstanding garden plant and an outstanding floral display. And certainly down in Cornwall, I think it's a plant we all ought to try if you haven't ever tried something quite like this before. There are other species of Lomatia which flower at about this sort of time, but to my mind none produce the sort of show that we're seeing here today. Truly spectacular. So back to hydrangeas, and this is a completely different hydrangea altogether. This is a climbing hydrangea which actually comes from Mexico, but it's perfectly hardy in our climate. It's very vigorous, it's self-clinging, it forms aerial roots, which we can look at in a second. It first came into this country only in 1973. And the first time I saw this was down at Trevano Gardens near Helston, where it was growing on a wall. Here you see it growing up over the arch, and we frequently have to trim it to keep it back in shape and stop it running amok. The flower heads, they're very bulbous, and then they open out into that very large flower that you see there now. Because this plant produces aerial roots, even on new growth stems you see the aerial roots grow, which allow it to cling on to walls or fences or trees or anything else. And actually it's very easy to propagate because you've already got the roots there, so making a cutting of Hydrangea seemanii is really not very difficult. This is related to one or two other evergreen species of hydrangea, in particular Hydrangea serratifolia, but the flowers here are bigger, and this is a much more vigorous thing. Down at Bernkoos we've planted one beside a big beech tree, and it's grown right to the top of the beech tree as vigorously as ivy would, and it now flowers away at the top of the beech tree at about 50 or 60 feet in height. If you look up the steps, you can see runners coming out, which are also rooting quite happily into the ground, and if they aren't cut off, what is almost a shrub here will suddenly take over. So it's something that you need to manage, but when the flowers come out as they do there, what a beautiful hydrangea that is. I should also say this is an evergreen, and not many hydrangeas are evergreen, but this one most definitely is. and it's withstood the beast from the east and all the other cold winters and nasty things that come, and it hasn't turned to hair. So if you've got an old dead tree or a wall which wants covering, this is the hydrangea for you.